All right, hello everybody. I'm Carla Murdoch, Director of the Mudd Center for Ethics, and I'm delighted that you're here with us today for the second lecture of the Mudd Center's series, Beneficence, Practicing an Ethics of Care. Last week, we heard from the philosopher Karen Storr, who discussed Kantian perspectives of beneficence and the values of love and respect. She addressed the importance of helping others on their terms, according to their goals and in line with their dignity. This afternoon, Helen Weng will expand our exploration of beneficence by discussing her important research on the practice of meditation. I'm so thankful to WNL graduate Amanda Deans for introducing me to Dr. Weng's work. Amanda worked with us at the Mudd Center last year and conducted research for the Beneficence series that shaped it in really important ways. So thank you, Amanda. Before I introduce Dr. Weng, I'd like for us to pause to appreciate the land that surrounds us and those who have cared for it for centuries, the Yisa and their descendants, the Monacan people. WNL's Native American and Indigenous cohort has exciting events in store for us that will help our community to cultivate our love and respect for those whose homelands we enjoy and benefit from each day. Stay tuned for more information about the cohort's events. Now, I'm delighted to introduce the clinical psychologist and neuroscientist, Dr. Helen Weng. As a researcher at the University of California, San Francisco's Osher Center for Integrative Health, she studies neurobiological mechanisms underlying compassion and mindfulness meditation. Her work was some of the first to suggest that compassion is a skill that can be enhanced through training and that may result in neural plasticity as well as behavioral changes. She's developed new ways to quantify meditation skills at an individual neural level using fMRI and machine learning methods. Her important recent research has focused on the neuroscience of meditation through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Weng's research has been featured in a range of public media outlets like the New York Times, the BBC, National Public Radio, and Fast Company. Among many other honors, Dr. Weng has presented her findings to His Holiness the Dalai Lama on 2 separate occasions. So with that, I'll welcome Dr. Weng.
Yes. Great. Thank you so much, Carla, for that introduction. All right, I'm really excited to talk to you today about intersectional neuroscience, which is a research framework I developed to bring diversity, equity, and inclusion to the neuroscience of meditation. Now, that was my specific subspecialty in my research, and I'll show you the way I did it by first being trained at a very well-respected institution, but then I realized that both the people studying meditators in research as well as the participants were not as diverse as what was represented in the population, and that there were many things we could do to make research more inclusive and therefore have findings that help more people. And so I hope through this talk you can see that if you take a similar approach but for your specific specialties, we need everything to be intersectional, right? Intersectional law, intersectional medicine, sociology, psychology, etc. So in the theme of beneficence, or practicing the ethics of care, I hope to show you how much of my research comes from that place. So again, my specialty was meditation. There's a specific meditation called compassion meditation, where you actually practice wishing people easing from suffering. And then you also practice things like non-judgment in mindfulness meditation, and we often parse the world into things that are good and bad, and unconsciously that means we push away and grasp towards things. And so if we look at things in a more non-judgmental way, we can actually see that there are more possibilities and more solutions. This this approach is naturally inclusive because you're not pushing away or grasping towards things. And what's really interesting is that new things emerge. And so I learned meditation on a personal level starting in graduate school. And something I didn't share with people until after graduate school is that a lot of the things I was working with in my meditation practice stemmed from being raised as a minority within a mostly white community and experiencing racism at a young age. And then I learned meditation from a scientific perspective, so with scientific methods, brain scanners, and data and statistics. And then I'm also trained as a clinical psychologist, and so I had to integrate what I had learned and then teach people from many different backgrounds with different conditions like depression and anxiety. So all of this is going on during grad school, and it turns out that they happen to be siloed, right? You're not supposed to talk about your personal life too much at school, and then science is different than clinical work. And what happened after graduate school, when I was in my postdoc and then assistant professor, is that, again, with my mindfulness practice, it pushes you towards integration. You want to examine all things non-judgmentally, and I wanted to come up with a system that honored all of these different views I had learned. And so with my own contemplative practice, which involves meditation, I will teach us a couple of practices so you can have a taste of it. I came up with a new approach called Intersectional Neuroscience to study meditation. All right, so like I mentioned, I'll show you my work on compassion meditation, answering the main questions. If we practice meditation internally, does it start to transform our behavior externally? Can we actually create a more kind world? And with that approach, I use the average brain approach, where we actually mathematically transform and average everyone's brain to look the same, to see what lights up. And that was the standard at the time. Then in my personal meditation and then clinical work, what I saw is that people have different minds, they have different backgrounds and histories, people respond to meditation differently. So can we come up with research methods that honor this diversity rather than try to wipe it out by averaging? And so first I had to learn community engagement approaches, which involves the communities you want to include in your work actually informing the research process. You're not doing it in isolation. And then we studied a different kind of meditation, which is focusing on your breath or part of your body. And I used an individualized approach using machine learning, which allowed each person's brain to be its own unique environment, which is, to me, more reflective of reality. And I did that at the Osher Center for Integrative Health. So meditation, I need to name, are exercises that are ancient Buddhist practices that come from Asia that are increasingly used to cultivate health. And so when you hear the term mindfulness meditation, which has become more popular, those set of practices come from Southeast Asia, like Thailand and Burma, and also from the Zen tradition based in China and Japan. And so I want to name that because from my perspective, mindfulness has been subjected to what's called cultural appropriation, where people from a dominant group kind of just extract something from a different culture and then use it for their own benefit. So by naming its cultural roots, that is my attempt to downplay cultural appropriation. And so in 2017, 14% of US adults practice meditation. I believe it's much higher now, especially since the pandemic and the popularity of apps. And with the Mind and Life Institute, that organization helped dialogue between Western scientists and Buddhist practitioners from Asia, including the Dalai Lama. Sorry, just something happened there. And we've adapted meditation practices to treat mental and physical health conditions, including stress, depression, anxiety, pain, and cancer. On average, we see moderate improvements, so it's not a cure-all. It's not going to magically make you feel way better all of a sudden. And different people respond in different ways. So how do we understand these varied processes? So one way to understand it is that meditation itself is not one thing. There's many different practices, hundreds and thousands of practices. And that's because it's training qualities of attention, and there are many different facets to our attention. So this includes what we're paying attention to, like are we paying attention to our breath or our family or a magical sunset? And then how focused are you versus having a more broad perspective? Then there's meta-awareness, being aware of your own mental states, being present-centered rather than focused on the past or future, and also emotional components like being non-judgmental, kind, and compassionate. And so if there's only one thing you take away from this talk today, I tried to distill down like 10 years of knowledge into one slide so that anyone can understand what's a very complex literature and field. So with meditation, we're changing internal aspects of our attention, especially to our bodies, with the hope that eventually it'll change the outer world, because our inner worlds do shape our outer worlds. If we're angry, we're going to manifest that in the outer world. If we're more gentle and kind, that's also going to manifest. And so can we become more aware and intentional about these processes? So first, we have to slow down our attention, because most of us are like, we have our 20 things on our to-do list every day, and that's very positive. However, sometimes we just need to slow down and observe what's going on in our minds and bodies. Maybe sometimes we have to identify certain experiences, like, am I feeling stressed or calm right now? And that contributes to self-knowledge. And breath and body meditations really help us slow down and focus on our lived experience in the moment. The second aspect is to bring kindness, which allows all experiences into our awareness, again, without pushing things away or grasping onto things. And that honors all parts of ourselves, even the parts that are difficult or that we're less happy with, as well as the things that are going really well. By allowing all things, what I've noticed with my practice is there's, instead of being like rigid about things, like I don't want that to happen, there starts to be like movement, internal movement. And to me, these experiences are informing each other and coming up with creative solutions. And so I always look out for this process within my clients in psychotherapy to help them bring attention to difficult parts of their lives in a kind way. And what happened is that they would create new interpretations of their experiences based on what their bodies and their minds were telling them. And loving kindness and compassion meditation helps promote bringing kindness. So with these qualities, if we can bring them to more moments of our lives, we can start to choose better ways of responding. So daily life behaviors like how we treat ourselves and other people, things like exercise. And hopefully we can change negative cycles and enhance positive ones. All right, so that's the one slide I hope everyone takes away with them. And as a clinical psychologist, relationships are really important for health. So people who have fewer relationships than they would like, and a fewer range of relationships, as well as if the relationships are maybe less adaptive, if there's some, they're less close or maybe even some negativity involved, then they're going to express more mental health symptoms like depression and anxiety. And they even, meta-analyses have shown that people even die more quickly if their quality of relationships is less. And the flip side is also true. So if you have more relationships that you want, and a variety of them, and they're high quality, that leads to positive health outcomes. So relationships are as important for health as things like drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes. And I'm not sure how many people are aware of that. So if we work on cultivating healthy relationships, that's just as important as drinking and smoking less. So first we're going to talk about compassion meditation, and I'm going to lead us through a short exercise. To me, it's a route to better relationships with ourselves and others. For loving kindness, it's wishing well-being for ourselves and others, and then compassion is the same thing as loving kindness, only when people are suffering. So it's wishing care for and relief from suffering. So I'm going to lead us through a 5-minute practice. You can try it out if you want, but if you don't, you can just relax. And you can keep your eyes open or closed, whatever's more comfortable for you. I tend to keep my eyes closed. All right? And get into a comfortable position. You can take a deep breath in and a deep breath out, and try to let go of any thoughts from the day. And let's just bring to mind a loved one. This could be a friend or family member, a pet, Someone you admire but have never met is totally fine. Someone you feel a connection to and feel safe with. And bring this person or being to mind in whatever way feels right to you. It could be envisioning their face, or a time you've spent with them, or the sound of their voice. And just notice how you feel bringing their presence to mind. Maybe your heart feels a little more open. You feel a bit more calm. There might be a slight smile on your face. And to ground ourselves in a sense of kindness for this person, we'll use some phrases. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live with ease. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live with ease. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live with ease. And if it's helpful, you may envision a golden light going from your heart to their heart to wish them well-being. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live with ease. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you live with ease. And now we'll also include ourselves in the circle of kindness. You can envision yourself standing next to the person or being with the person. May we be safe. May we be happy. May we be healthy. May we live with ease. May we be safe. May we be happy. May we be healthy. May we live with ease. And we all go through difficult times. So if there's something challenging that you're going through or your loved one is going through, we can also offer ourselves and our loved ones comfort during this time. May our suffering be eased. May our suffering be eased. May we offer comfort in challenging times. And in these last few moments, you can offer yourself and your loved one whatever phrases or wishes resonate with you. These words were just a suggestion. You should use whatever connects you the most strongly to a sense of kindness and well-being. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes and come back to the room. All right, so given what we just practiced, what may have been happening in our brains? And so in science, we have to define things. So compassion is described as the feeling that arises in witnessing another suffering and motivates a subsequent desire to help. So there's three components to that: witnessing suffering, the emotional response of caring, and the motivation to help. And that will increase the likelihood, we think, of actually engaging in pro-social behavior. And so the people in our study practiced the meditation we just went through. They also practiced with a stranger and a difficult person. So someone who may be annoying you, not the worst person, but just learning to work with also people that are challenging. And so I like to think about this as strengthening the compassion muscle. It's easy to feel compassion towards a loved one, like my cat, Elliot, and then more challenging for a difficult person. And so you practice whatever's accessible to you and gradually work towards whatever feels right to you. And so in the lab where I was trained, the Center for Healthy Minds, they studied compassion experts and put them in the functional MRI scanner. So it's a big magnet you see here, and it uses magnetic energy to estimate levels of oxygen in the blood in the brain. So that's our proxy for brain activity. If you see more colors, that means there's more oxygen in that area of the brain. And so they played them sounds of people suffering, like screaming, and they showed much stronger responses in a region called the insula, which is involved in empathy and body awareness. And my question was, what about people without very much experience? Those people practice for tens of thousands of hours. What if you practice just 30 minutes a day on the internet at home for 2 weeks? And so we recruited people from Madison, Wisconsin, and randomly assigned them to compassion training, 20 people, and then reappraisal training. So reappraisal is very well studied. It's changing the way you think about a situation to feel less stressed. And then we measured their brain activity both before and after the 2 weeks, and then also measured pro-social behavior through economic exchanges. And so this was at the time like one of the most rigorous ways to study this, because we're randomly assigning people and measuring neuroplasticity by both before and after brain scans. And so any changes we see in the brain, we can attribute directly due to the compassion meditation. So how do you measure compassionate behavior, especially in the lab? We created an economic task called the Redistribution Game. So it comes from behavioral economics, which uses very standardized economic exchanges to study social behavior. So in this game, player A gets $10, player B gets $0, and player C gets $5. In the first move of the game, player A shares only 1 out of $10 with player B, which we consider an unfair interaction, 10% of the split. Player C watches this, and if they so choose, they can spend $1 which would take $2 away from player A and redistribute it to player B. And that's our model of altruistic redistribution. Anything people decided, it came out of their paycheck, so it had real economic consequences. And so after just 2 weeks of training, 30 minutes a day, the compassion group gave almost twice as much money as the control group, showing that if you practice compassion internally, it starts to express externally. We showed them pictures of people suffering or neutral images before and after the training. And I showed this to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and he called it effortful compassion, which was very in line with the way we were thinking about it, because by learning a new emotional response, we call this emotion regulation, and that recruits the prefrontal cortex, one of the most evolutionarily advanced parts of the brain in humans, and it's involved in self-control, thinking and planning, and the same can be applied to emotions, so we can learn to be more aware and monitor and change our emotions. And so the prefrontal cortex, we think, is interacting with other parts of the brain involved in generating emotion. So the amygdala is involved in arousal and distress, the insula is involved in empathy, and the nucleus accumbens is involved in social reward. This is also called the pleasure center in the brain. So anything you like or enjoy would activate the nucleus accumbens. And so what we saw is that the people who are able to increase activity in the prefrontal cortex and a region involved in empathy called the parietal cortex, and the combination of these two are involved in attention regulation networks. The people who are able to increase these brain regions the most were the ones who ended up giving the most in the game. So again, the more you change your brain due to meditation, the more you give. And then we saw the prefrontal cortex was also communicating with the nucleus accumbens involved in reward, so that the more they were correlated or communicating, the more people ended up giving in the game. So I think people are learning to approach suffering in a more caring way that activates positive emotion systems rather than feeling distressed or anxious. I have to go more quickly than I would like, but this finding shows, we actually looked at where their eyes were looking in the brain scanner. The more people could visually engage with suffering, the more their amygdala activity actually went down, and the amygdala is involved in distress. So it shows the capacity that people can learn to be more calm and balanced in the face of suffering. We released this meditation for free. It's at the Center for Healthy Minds website, so feel free to download and try it. Over 30,000 people around the world have downloaded it, so you can imagine if these were skills that people learned, we're planting seeds of compassion and kindness, and it can grow. All right. And this is really revolutionary. So things get passed down from our families, intergenerationally, through cultural and history, that are really quite positive and wonderful, right? We also pass down negative behaviors, and we often absorb them unconsciously and react without awareness, which leads to maladaptive behaviors. With mindfulness, we start to see the space between something that happens, like someone yelling at you, and then our reaction. And so we call this a response because it involves more awareness and intentionality. And so we can actually change habitual reactions to be more conscious responses with embodied compassionate awareness and learn better ways of being with one another. And I've seen this happen with my clients. They actually were able to identify this, and they called themselves the cycle breakers. So I found this very motivating. The study did really well, and it was considered very successful. And we saw, however, if I averaged all the brain activity together, I actually saw no results. So these regions you saw were found through regression analyses, correlations, but if you average everything together, you saw nothing. And so I refused to believe that that meant that people were not learning compassion, because we see this behavioral change, right? So to me, after sitting with it for 2 years, I was like, it's not capturing the variability within people. So luckily I had the clinical training. I saw people responding differently to different meditations, and I'm like, we have to come up with better methods that actually reflects brain diversity. And so next I'll talk about intersectional neuroscience and how we use community engagement to recruit a more diverse population. So, So right now, the story about meditation in the brain is meditation changes the brain. So it's really exciting. I consider this cultural conditioning in the media coverage, like simple, snappy messages are very popular. But look at the sentence structure. It suggests meditation is one thing, which I hope by now you realize it's not. And it suggests brains are all the same, which I also hope you see are not, and I'll show you pictures later. And so we have to come up with more nuanced ways of understanding this. And that's the way the science is done. Meditation changes brain structure, it increases prefrontal cortex activity, it reduces pain. In my own study, it helps you become more compassionate. And then we do average of the averages, which makes it seem even more real that there's one brain that's responding to different kinds of meditation. But as we know, people are complex. This is Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. So it acknowledges that single individuals are embedded within microsystems of their families and their schools and their healthcare, and then mesosystems of their neighborhood and workplace and legal services, and then macrosystems politically. Intersectionality, developed by Kimberly Crenshaw, acknowledges that people belong to multiple marginalized groups depending on their social identities. So if you're a racial minority and a gender minority like Black women, you're going to face more challenges because of systems of oppression at these different levels. And so I developed intersectional neuroscience, which I call a compassionate research framework that includes and honors as many identities as possible, including intersectional identities. And again, it just makes the science better. The more inclusive, the more you're capturing the variability, then you're representing data more accurately and people more accurately. So just to show you, brains are really different. This is a meditator, this is a control. You can physically see that their brain structures are different. These people are actually matched in age and gender, so they're relatively similar. But what we do is then mathematically warp these individual brains to look like a standard brain. This is 152 brains from Canada. And then you get a new brain picture that looks more like the standard brain, and then you average all of those together to get those single brain pictures that you see in the news media. So this assumption means brain activity works similarly across people, but the reality is people differ in their brain structure and function. So luckily, we have new methods where we can treat brain activity as unique, like fingerprints. So each person has unique fingerprints, and you can learn the pattern on each fingerprint, and that's the same with your brain as well. All right. I have too much to cover. I think I explained all of it. So I worked with the East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland, California, which is one of the most diverse meditation centers in the country. And we partnered with them to create more inclusive methods, and we honored neurodiversity using these individualized neuroscience methods. And so we actually did an analysis of participants in meditation neuroscience studies and showed an overrepresentation of white participants and an underrepresentation of Black, Latinx, and Native Americans. So that means the results are not generalizable to the whole population, and we have to do better. So a little bit more about the East Bay Meditation Center. They've created affinity groups to create social safety based on social identity. So there's the People of Color Sangha, there's the Alphabet Sangha for LGBTQ people, there's the Everybody, Every Mind Sangha for people with disabilities and chronic health conditions, there's People of Color Yoga, and this is because when you're with people more from the dominant culture, it's hard to be settled in your own body. And so it helps people to create safety and community in this way. It's not intentionally meant to be exclusive. They have agreements for multicultural interaction, which I love. You can find this on their website. Some of the important ones, try on a different perspective. There's a difference between intent and impact. So even if you didn't intend to harm someone with your words or actions, that it may have had a different impact on the way it was experienced, and can we listen and learn from each other? And here's one of my favorites, move up and move back. As socialized as an Asian woman, I've been socialized to be quite quiet and a good listener, and I really had to learn how to move up to let my voice and perspectives be heard. And then I've also had to learn to move back. So being a neuroscientist is a dominant culture, right? Having a lot of education is a dominant culture. And so I also have to practice moving back, especially with other marginalized communities. And to learn more, please read Larry Yang's book, Awakening Together. He's one of the founding members of the East Bay Meditation Center, and Rhonda McGee, The Inner Work of Racial Justice. So what does community engagement look like? It's a transformative research paradigm which aims to enhance well-being of underserved populations through cultivating ethical, respectful, and responsible relationships with participants and community. And so we actually revisit as much as we can of the scientific process. What is valid? What's considered evidence? Language we use? Business as usual within academia, which is to produce as fast as possible, right? But what are we missing in that quick pace? And so I love this because it's an embodied process. We include stakeholders at every step. There's continuous dialogue and communication instead of extracting something and then disappearing. There's clarity over time and compensation, so you include in your grant applications, there's this this pot set aside to pay our stakeholders. And then if you compare this with interacting with people from a more privileged status, if you're working with your hero, of course you would do all these things, right? But once you're interacting with people with less privileged status, the status quo is to take advantage. And so you can read my paper. I show lots of examples of how I had to change my processes, my own behavior. I try to address inequities at the outset through email conversation, through verbal conversation, and say, you know, I'm not going to be perfect. There's this history of harm with the scientific community and marginalized communities. Please, if you let me know if some of this harm is happening again, I will examine my behavior and correct it. And even if you say this, it takes a lot of practice to actually embody it, and I had to do a lot of practice. Like, none of this came easily, at least 3 years of very intensive personal work, as well as the, you know, the intellectual, or the work, the daytime work. So the process we did, we engaged key community members, Xiaojing Wang and Musha Makita. We did a small focus group for culturally sensitive procedures. So we had people representing the People of Color Sangha, the Alphabet Sangha, the Everybody, Every Mind Sangha. There's also the fat community, and then also people with lower income. And so any of the suggestions they made, I took as many as I could without starting to shift the scientific questions. Then we had community events at EBMC, so sometimes you have to leave your ivory tower and live, you know, spend time in the spaces that are with the people you wish to collaborate with. There was ongoing community feedback, continuous emails. We changed our consent procedures to be more ethical, sharing credit and resources, so payment, co-authorship, and attention. And so I love all of this because it shows we can change the research process to be a form of embodied social action. These things are not separated. All right, so there's lots of adaptations we made. A lot of it had to do with language, but it's not just the words, it's what are the intentions and the power dynamics that are underneath those words. And so a lot of scientific recruitment materials are written from the perspective of the scientist, which tends to categorize people in ways that may or may not fit, right? And so we reframed our language to be from the perspective of the meditators. Is the study a good fit for you? Some more examples. So with race, we honored lived experiences by letting people self-identify first, and then asked for standard scientific classification from the National Institutes of Health. And so the first question is, with which race or races do you identify? And people can use the words that resonate with them. Do you identify as multiracial because they tend to be underrepresented? And then we say, for the purpose of scientific reporting, with which races do you identify? So this is a list from the NIH. It's not exhaustive, right? It's based on the social, cultural history of the United States. And this also, the way it's phrased, puts science in its cultural place, because science is also a culture. Same for gender identity. How do you self-identify your gender? And then some reviewers may ask to be presented with general categories, and if so, which one would you choose? So we let people choose. And then we also ask pronouns at the out front, and then we're using the correct pronouns throughout the study. So we did a lot of changes. Feel free to read the paper. It's Frontiers in Psychology, and it's open access, so anyone can read it. So I also was able to show this work to His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Mongolia, and he was very interested in this multicultural community that the East Bay Meditation Center cultivated. And in my experiences, it's the most, it's always a process, right? You never fully get it right, but it was the most realized version of a multicultural community that I've ever experienced. So I highly recommend going to their website. There's talks. They do lots of things on Zoom, and so you can also participate in some of the sanghas if they feel right to you. And the best thing was that our more inclusive approach actually resulted in a more diverse study. We had 15 people in the brain scanner. These are expensive studies, so the ends tend to be smaller. 80% identified as racial and ethnic minorities, including Black and Indigenous people. and 53% identified as LGBTQA. And some people belong to both, and so I was happy that we were able to represent some intersectional identities. We need to do further outreach with people with disabilities, so no one identified having any disabilities. And people said things like, people decided not to be in the study and said things like, like going to an academic medical center is like going into the jaws of the oppressor. And I would feel it, like I never felt fully comfortable there. I had a lot of anxiety there, so I totally understood that. And we also had to do more outreach with people with lower socioeconomic background. So I think like interacting with the fancy MRI machine is appealing to some people who, you know, where scientific and technical things are more exciting, but it can be also frightening if you're not exposed to things like that. Okay, so how did I then study individual brains with new methods? Okay, before we go into the nitty-gritty, first I want to say emotions are embodied. When you feel stressed, a cat may make you feel stressed if you're allergic, a snake may make you feel stressed, or vice versa. It activates the sympathetic nervous system, which impacts pupil dilation, heartbeat, digestion, glucose release, and hormones. And so when we feel joyful, when we feel sad, when we feel stressed out, there are all these different physiological things happening, and in our nervous system, we can actually feel some of those things internally. Like when you're really nervous, sometimes you can feel your heartbeat really fast, right? And so to me, this is a positive. We have kind of a window into our physical and emotional systems if we practice looking inward. And so in my clinical experience, I often ask people to pay attention to the breath, to the chest and the heart, to their stomachs, because chronic stress can lead to things like irritable bowel syndrome, right? There is this mind-body connection. And so I'll spend a few minutes so we can practice a breath-focused meditation. And it's just getting to know some of the sensations of our bodies. And again, just practice with me if you feel comfortable. You can keep your eyes open or closed. And just gently bring your attention to the sensations of breathing. So our breathing is like a window into our state of mind and our bodies. And just notice what it feels like to be breathing. You may notice the air coming in at your nostrils and then going down the back of your throat and then deeper into your lungs. You may notice your stomach or diaphragm moving up and down with each in-breath and out-breath. You may notice coolness or warmth. And just bring your attention to wherever you feel your breath the most clearly in your body. And your mind will start to naturally wander to other things. You might feel sleepy. You might think about dinner or an assignment or a conversation. That's totally normal. Just gently bring it back to your breath. Again, noticing any movement, tingling, or pressure. And there's no right way to breathe or to feel your breathing. However you're feeling it in your body is totally okay. There's nothing to accomplish or get right. It's just being with your mind and your body in this moment. And just notice, is your breath telling you anything in this moment? Are you calm? Are you nervous? Are you happy or sad? You don't have to come up with an exact answer, but just ask your body this question sometimes. What are you feeling right now? And when you're ready, you may open your eyes and come back to the room. All right, so how do we measure this? Right? Sometimes we're on the breath, sometimes we're thinking about dinner, sometimes we get sleepy, think about beneficence or world peace. There's actually multiple mental states with this, right? Sometimes we're focused, and that involves the prefrontal cortex. Sometimes we start to mind wander. That involves something called the default network, the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex. And this is on a lot of the time. We kind of like talk to ourselves a lot, right? And so one way that mindfulness meditation can help relieve stress is that it helps us enter a different mode where we're more present with just our physical sensations, and that over time that can quiet down our self-talk. And sometimes we really need that, because sometimes we say stressful things to ourselves. All right, so if we can treat brain activity as unique like fingerprints, we can learn a lot more things about meditation in the brain. So I call this the embody framework. First, we need a meditation period, so people meditate on their breath for 10 minutes. But then we need data to train a machine learning classifier to learn what their brain patterns look like when they're focused on the breath or not. So I call this the internal attention task. There are 6 blocks. And then it starts to learn, what does your brain look like when you're on your breath? When are you mind wandering? And when are you thinking about your life or self-referential processing? And I'll explain how we got those brain patterns in the next slides. Then we can use those brain patterns to decode or read out what's happening during meditation and actually get a second-by-second estimate of what people are focused on, and then get new measures of attention during meditation, like what percentage of the time were you on your breath or mind wandering. So the way we did this is we broke up attention into different chunks. We recruited the meditators. We said, pay attention to your breath, but for 16 to 30 seconds. So it's short enough that we think people can maintain their attention. We also said, you may stop paying attention now, which should induce mind wandering. And then we said, think about the past week, think about the next week, and think about right now to induce self-referential processing, or this self-talk. We had 2 controls: pay attention to your feet, another part of the body, and pay attention to the sounds, because the brain scanner is really loud. And so the first question is, can machine learning differentiate between these 5 mental states? And across 16 people, every single mental state was identified well above chance. Chance level is 20% for 5 mental states. And then if we look at the individual level, it worked for all 8 meditators in the first study, 6 out of 8 controls, and then all 15 of the diverse meditators. So our task is working especially in people with meditation experience. And this is to represent how people really have different brain activity during meditation. So focusing on the breath in meditator 1 looks different than meditator 2 and compared to the controls. And then mind wandering looks different among each person, and self-referential processing looks different among each person as well. So this just helped solidify my thinking around this, because again, when I averaged all the compassionate brains together, I saw everything wiped out. And you could see if brain activity is located in different areas, if you average all together, you would also see a null result. So I think this approach fits each individual much better. And then this is a really cool part. So we can use the brain patterns to estimate for every second of brain data, were they on their breath, mind wandering, or doing the self-talk. And so we can start to see these readouts for each person. Meditator 1, on their breath, start to mind wander, start to self-talk, and then come back to the breath. and then start to mind wander, self-talk, come back to the breath. Meditator 2 has a different pattern, right? Because each person, when you meditate, it's not like someone else's meditation session. It's different for each person. So then we could quantify breath events and mind wandering events, and then control participants. If we can identify their brain patterns, we can also use this approach and see what they're focusing on during meditation. And then we can quantify each time they're on their breath, how long were you on your breath? And we have these new metrics like percentage time on the breath or mind wandering, the number of events, and the average duration. We can also look at the individual levels, so you can see this person focused on their breath more than they mind wandered or did the self-talk, whereas this person focused on their breath more than mind wandering but less in self-talk. So it starts to show individual variability for each meditation session. We can also look at it at the group level, which is what scientists tend to do. And on average, the meditators are focusing on their breath more than mind wandering or self-referential processing. And it's because when they are on their breath, they stay there a little longer. And hopefully that's because they're remembering that they're supposed to focus on your breath. Sometimes you get lost the whole time, but it seems like they were remembering. All right. And so both of these papers are published in open access journals. The compassion papers are on the Center for Healthy Minds website, and the MP3 is for free as well. So I hope you can see that we can develop research methods that are more inclusive of marginalized groups using an intersectional approach. The framework is continually iterative because we're always communicating, and cultures and groups are always changing. There's no one brain in meditation or any other psychological process, and people have studied this as well, things like working memory processes. People activate different parts of their brain, but the average region is in the prefrontal cortex. If you stimulate the average region, you don't see a change in working memory, but if you stimulate the person's individual region, then you see a change in people's working memory. And work like that is done in Brad Postel's lab. It's very inspiring to me. And so anytime you see a brain result in a magazine or newspaper and you only see one picture of an average brain, just remember this talk and start to question that. So scientific methods and discoveries will improve by including more diverse perspectives. And if you embody intersectional approaches in your research, it's itself a transformative process. You will change in a way that you may be unexpected, but ultimately is very rewarding. I felt like I was much more open and patient and less rigid by going through this process. And so through this work, I was named one of the 12 powerful women of the mindfulness movement in 2019, which is a huge honor. I think it was nominated by women peers in the field, and it included like teachers and business people and scientists. So I felt like very seen in that moment. And I think they knew how difficult it was for me to even make it to this level because the neuroscience of meditation is extremely white male dominated. There are systematic biases pushing women out of science fields, and it can differ by race as well. So again, an intersectional approach. And then there's also cultural appropriation in mindfulness with dynamics of oppression, extraction, dominance, exclusion, and denial of expertise. And I've experienced all of these things. And so just again, be mindful of who is in the field, who do you help give career opportunities to, who may need some mentoring and opportunities. And I hope this will inspire you to think about in your own lives and fields, if you slow it down and bring kindness, what cycles can you change and are you motivated to change? Because it's all about beneficence has to be expressed through each of us. We don't do it the same way, and it will just keep rippling out to more and more people. So thanks so much. Lots of mentors and collaborators, yeah. So we're ready to take questions.
Use the mic for questions so that everybody can hear well.
Hi, thank you for your talk. This was fascinating, and thank you for your work to make this a more inclusive area. I have one question about the effects or that anything that you saw in relationship to white people who are meditating and whether or not their pro-social or altruistic behaviors increased towards non-white people.
Great question.
Because I know oftentimes we're more likely to help people that look, act similar to us. So I wonder if you've done any research around that.
Great question. More work is being done in that area, luckily. So a colleague of mine, Yuna Kang, she studied loving kindness meditation, so that first meditation we practiced. And she asked people to practice it like the way we did it. You pick people from your own lives, then you also pick strangers, but she didn't tell them who to practice with. And then she tested them with something called the implicit association task, which is a task from cognitive psychology, and it tests how much you implicitly associate negative connotations to certain groups of people. You can do this online. It's called the Harvard Implicit Association Task. There's all different groups. So older people, women, Black and African American people, Asian people. I think there's STEM field biases. And so she tested them with associations with Black people and unhoused people, and found that if someone learned loving kindness for 6 to 8 weeks, it decreased the level of bias towards those people, even though they were not explicitly asked to practice with those people. And so then I see white colleagues say things like, look, practice meditation and you'll be less biased. And I spend a lot of time with these people, and in my head, I'm like, you have to practice more. This is not enough. This is not enough, right? Because, anyway, it's not enough. So to me, you have to bring it into consciousness, right? So I would actually recommend people, dedicating some time noticing what biases you may have. And I know it's very painful and hard to say out loud, but it has to be brought into consciousness and worked with, because it's not going to happen from a 5-minute meditation, right? It's like I just showed you that the second section of my work. It felt like it took me 2 to 3 years just to loosen that initial edge to all of it, right? Because I was like, what do you mean I have to change all of my materials, right? How much time is that going to take? But that resistance, I don't want to do that. That was the reflection of my bias, right? And so I call it the fog. It was a fog I was in for 2 years, undoing things the way I thought they were supposed to be done. And that was just taking the initial edge off. And so I recognize within myself, this is a continuous, ongoing process. And so a lot more studies have to be done, right? And to me, the ultimate measurement outcome is, how do you treat people? Do they have more resources, right? If things are still as inequitable as they were before your meditation versus after your meditation, it has to be put into action. This is not just about wishful thinking, right?
Other questions?
Yes. As Terry said, thank you so much for speaking. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the techniques you used in machine learning. Did you collaborate with engineers? And how might that change further directions as well?
Yeah, so I collaborated with Jared Lewis Peacock, who's at UT Austin, and we met in grad school. It's very fortunate that we met. So he was from Brad Postel's lab, who I mentioned, and he was bringing these individualized machine learning methods to his working memory work. And he was kind of a fan of my work. And I was like, that seems really cool what you're doing. I really don't understand it. And it took me into my postdoc until I could actually learn more. So basically, he had a master's in computer science, and so was very fluent with coding. And so he was able to share his code with me, and I adapted it to my study. And so if you want to get into brain imaging work, I would suggest learning coding as soon as you can, because it's just getting more computationally intense. And you can also collaborate with folks who have that skill set. But the more coding unit, the coding is the power language in brain imaging. And then there are all different types of like algorithms and things too. And other people work specifically on just like tweaking algorithms. Yeah.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. All right, Finn, coming your way. I'm going to go around. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Murdoch, and thank you again for this really insightful talk. I just wanted to ask, looking at a lot of these like positive benefits that you have shown in this presentation, but also recognizing the impact of cultural appropriation, how would you suggest that someone who does not come from a culture where a lot of these mindfulness practices originate, how would you suggest that they would reflect on these findings or practice these findings in their own lives without levying more harm?
That's also a great question. Thank you for asking. So from talking to my colleagues who are meditation teachers and come from Asian backgrounds, they say whenever you talk about it or maybe learn some practices, just acknowledge culturally where it comes from. So that helped me say, okay, I always have to say it comes from Buddhism, from Asia, right? And just to know that cultural root. And then if you're interested, you can examine more. And there's thousands of ancient texts about Buddhist philosophy and practices, and also more contemporary writers. And then it's not just Buddhism, actually. There's Christian contemplative traditions, Jewish traditions, Sufi traditions. So if you already affiliate with a certain religion, then I would also investigate that. So there are lots of practices to slow it down, bring kindness, right? And then if you're not religious, it's just good to know and good to say. So if people are bringing up mindfulness, you may want to acknowledge some of the cultural roots. Just to remind people, because the same thing's going on with yoga and South Asian cultures, and it's just striking, right? I'm like, where are the people that it comes from? And it was a very difficult process going through training and being one of the only Asian people and people of color. To me, it was just bizarre. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Weng.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Great questions.
So the Mud Centers series will continue on October 17th with Richard Weisbord, who will be talking about cultivating compassion and a sense of justice as we raise children. So I welcome you to come back then. Thanks, everybody.